nothing about Wentworth or the museum.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So, Monty, were you born and raised here in Lexington?
Except for one day. We didn't have a hospital here then, so I was born in St. Joe's Hospital in Kansas City. Spent the night there and then moved to Lexington. So, basically, yes, I've lived in Lexington all my life. Basically, always had a home here, either through my parents, and when I went on to college, I still came back here on weekends, and later on went to work for a company and moved around, and still pretty much maintain an address here. And even after I left the retail business and went to work for Dunbrook, always maintained a home in Lexington, no matter I traveled a lot, so some cases if I was somewhere a lot, it was easier to get an apartment there, or when I took over down to El Dorado Springs and started running that operation down there, I just bought a house because it was cheaper than paying rent and everything else, plus I had some equity and just worked out better. But Lexington's always been my home.
Okay. So, your folks, your father was an attorney?
My father actually is from Wellington. My mother was born and raised here in Lexington. Of course, my dad eventually moved here. He worked his way through law school, then wound up a little 4 years, a little picnic over in Europe, and came back and finished up law school and actually ran for probate judge of Lafayette County. And at that point in time, he was the youngest judge in the state of Missouri. And he was probate judge for, about 15 years, several terms. Then ran for prosecutor. He was prosecutor for a good number of years and then decided to go back in probate, and he was probate judge up until he turned age 70, which is mandatory retirement for judges in Missouri. So, and he kind of retired and never really went back into private practice, but he did taxes and various other functions, kept him busy. Died at the ripe old age of 99 here a few years ago.
Okay, give us some sound. Okay, so at least when I knew you, you lived out on 17th Street, and you had some siblings?
I had a brother, yeah. It's actually, when I was born, we lived just a block from Wentworth, really. We lived on the corner of 18th and Main. Kind of a two-story brick house there, and we lived in the upstairs part, and my grandfather lived in the downstairs. He later he was a carpenter, cabinet maker by trade. He had plans to build himself a house, and about the time he was getting ready to build it, the lot that he thought he had bought, somebody bought it out from underneath him. So he built his house in his backyard of the other house. So that's, if you go to that location, you'll see the little brick house on the corner and then a stucco house between that and the alley. And that's why that house is kind of there out of place. He just said, to heck with you, I'm going to build it in my backyard. Then we later moved out onto North 17th Street. And that's actually basically the only other home I had. My parents had that until both of them had, later years. My mom passed away fairly early with Alzheimer's, and then my dad, as I said earlier, lived to 99, but he spent about 6 years living out with us. We moved out, and not really into the country, but out south of town. We live on about 30 acres out there. And he stayed with us for a while until it got to the point we weren't home a lot and he needed more assisted living. So moved into an assisted living place and then later on into a nursing home. But lived in that house, or they had that house for 50 some odd years.
So at some point, I assume you attended Lexington High School?
Went to Lexington High School up through my sophomore year. Then went to Wentworth and started Wentworth in 1965, my junior year. Went to Wentworth Junior High School, junior year, senior year, and then went back for junior college for 2 years of junior college and graduated in 69. So graduated high school Wentworth 1967 and college in 1969. Then I went on down to Warrensburg. At that time, it was just a state college. It was CMSC. And went there for a year and then transferred to Missouri Valley and finished up down there after about 2 years down there. So then went to work in the retail business.
Pause for a second. She left. Should we call her? I think she's probably trying to get back.
Yeah, that's fine.
Hey, Sue? Hey, Sue? Hello, Sue. You can cut through if you need to. We're paused here. And don't be making rabbit ears behind you.
Send in the birds.
Okay, proceed.
Go ahead. Okay. Okay. And then why did you decide to go to Wentworth? Was that your parents' decision?
It was not given to me as an option. I was not the greatest student in the world, and I, like a lot of kids at that age, had my issues. And I guess the icing on the cake, it was the spring of '65. I had a tendency to not go to school a lot. You know, I'd kind of hid in the front door, get dropped off, and let the parents drive away, and then go out the back door. And we had a snowstorm that day. And of course, school got let out early, but we left a little earlier than school did and was with a couple more friends, and we were running around town in a little Volkswagen, driving through snowdrifts. We headed out behind the Lexington elevator just in time to see a Missouri Pacific work engine pulling out between a couple of the buildings. And needless to say, roads were snowy and icy. It was almost a blizzard, but we broadsided this work engine in a Volkswagen. The engineer did not know we'd hit it, and we latched onto a step on the engine, and it drug us down the tracks about 100 yards and spit us out on a little old metal telephone pole. And we did $5 damage to the train, so they had to weld the steps. So, you know, we got a little credit for that, but that's kind of when my parents realized that, you know, he's not where we think he is. And they had a little meeting with the school, and they found out that, you know, I wasn't necessarily quite truthful with, you know, my attendance and my disciplinary problems. So they thought Wentworth might be a good fit for me. So the fall of that year, I was enrolled in Wentworth.
Tell me about your first demerits.
Oh, my first demerits, yes. Wonderful man by the name of Colonel Molyneux, who later became a good, well, he was family friend, and later, you know, we got to talk quite a bit. But I was walking home from school on my third day of school, which was almost my last day of my career at Wentworth. But he lived out in the same neighborhood that my parents did, and right where he turns off to go up to his house is where my parents' property line starts, and I, of course, was on their property. I was almost home. I was within, you know, spitting distance of the house. And of course, I'm sitting there with my hat on the back of my head. My blouse was unbuttoned, my tie was loose, chewing gum, smoking a cigarette, just having a good old time, just minding my business, heading home. And he pulls up to politely explain to me that, you know, I wasn't necessarily being the appropriate cadet, and started explaining to me the wrongfulness of my ways. And I would have been okay if I just would have let it go at that and taken it at the warnings, but no, I had to pretty well convince him that, you know, what I thought of his rules and regulations. So we parted ways, and the next morning I have a note to come see him in his office. And by the time we got through, I ended up about 10 hours worth of demerits. Smoking in public, disrespect to an officer. I mean, the list goes on and on. I think he ran out of stick sheets when he was writing them up, or he might still be writing now, I don't know. But Thanksgiving rolled around, I'm still sitting over there sitting off demerits. But it was kind of funny, because later years, you know, him and my parents were kind of, they socialized together, and we got to joking about that one evening because I was tending bar for him, and he said, I was trying to get you to shut up. All you had to do was just keep your mouth shut.
He was mean. So now you're in Wentworth, and now give us the years that you were there, that you actually were attending school.
You know, I found that it was not as easy to get out of things there as it was in high school. You know, they had a tendency to know where you were. A friend of mine, Sam Ratliff, he always had a saying, you know, with Wentworth, he says, you know where you're supposed to be, what time you're supposed to be there, and what you're going to do when you get there. And they kept track of all that stuff. They knew where you were supposed to be and when you were supposed to be there. So. And you better do what you were supposed to do when you got there. So it took me a little while to settle in, but you know, after about my first year, I really kind of got to the point I enjoyed it. And I've told people in the past, you know, they gripe about Wentworth and their experiences, but my experiences is you got out of Wentworth what you put in it. And you know, if you wanted to make something out of it, it could be enjoyable. If you wanted to fight the system all the way, it could be downright miserable. And I struck a happy medium.
Well, after you left Wentworth and went on to college, did the experience at Wentworth help you in any way?
Oh, absolutely. I look back on things now, and I have no idea where I would have been had it not been for Wentworth. But you know, it gave me a discipline that I really need and a structure that I kind of formatted later. And I always have kind of said there was kind of two probably turning points in my life that probably put me on the track that I was on. One was kind of the building blocks that I learned at Wentworth, and when I met my wife Ruth, it kind of gave me the incentive to follow those guidelines, and I ended up with a very successful career. So. And to this day, I still kind of go by those principles. My wife and I get into arguments because I can't remember who it was, but somebody made the comment to me when I was at Wentworth that talking about punctuality, and they made the comment that early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. And I still go by that today. My wife and I disagree on that philosophy, but I found that it pays off, you know.
Well, yeah, she would outrank the commandant.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. She would definitely outrank the commandant. She's the boss.
So, Monte, because I really don't know, I knew you were there and I was there, but were you involved in any of the athletics or activities, band?
Not really. I was on the swim team my first year there, and I did some gymnastics, more activity period things as far as actually varsity sports. I kind of got involved with some of the regular military people along about my second year there, and I got heavily involved in the military department, and I eventually kind of had the armory, which I love guns. And that was kind of right up my alley. So part of my function up there was kind of keeping track of the guns. And of course, at that time, we had all the M1 rifles in the barracks. And there was periodic inventories of those, and I kind of had to do all that. Ended up as communications officer, which was, you know, football games and things, we had to haul those big speakers out, set them up on the stands and run all the wires. And bivouacs, we had to run all the wires to the different command posts. But indoor dress parades, that wore me out. You know, I had to go out and I had a little screwdriver and I unscrewed that little cap on that wooden floor and I plugged that microphone in. I went back and sat down. Then, of course, when parade was over, I went back, unplugged the wire, put the cap back on, took the microphone out, and I was done.
That was tough. But you know, there's advantages, disadvantages.
It is, yeah. And of course, I living out on 17th Street, you know, from the end of the football stadium, I was probably 3 blocks up the road. And I was down at E&F Company, and of course I walked back and forth to school every day. And it just seemed totally asinine for me to have to walk all the way down to the bottom of that hill, march back up to the top of the field for the football games, and then march back down to the bottom to go home again. So I'd kind of gotten friends with my platoon sergeant. And he got to the point at football games, he would allow me to be on the back ranks, and when we cleared the gates, he would dismiss me so I could go around and sneak around the back fence, and I could be home before they got back down to the bottom of the hill. So, Wentworth had a lot, you figure out how to work things. You can work the system. Not easily, but little things you can kind of get accomplished.
Who were your biggest influences there while you were there at school?
I'd say my biggest one was probably a cadet by the name of Val Calder. He was a class ahead of me, but Val and I got to be pretty good friends, which is probably one of the reasons I went down to Warrensburg. He left and went to Warrensburg. I went down there. He became my fraternity father at Warrensburg, and then we kind of kept close tabs of each other shortly after that. Then when he went into the service, he just kind of disappeared for a while. And didn't hear from him for a long time, and probably about 5 years before he passed away. About 10 o'clock one night, him and Heather Walls, who was the daughter of a teacher at Wentworth, heard a knock on my door and opened it up, and Heather was there, and behind her was Val Calder. First time I'd seen him in I don't know how many years. And we had a nice long visit, and that's kind of when I found out that he was having some heart issues and some other things. And, he had retired from the Army because of his health, and he passed away not too long after that. But I would say he was probably the number one as far as cadet or senior officer that really had an influence on me. And him and my first, really remember my first company commander was John Patinas, and he kind of took me under his wing a little bit and kept me in the right direction, because my first dress parade was not good. That's when I learned that my being out of step, that had no impact on me. It went straight to the brigade commander. My mess up had basically destroyed my squad, which ruined the platoon, which completely annihilated the company and embarrassed the hell out of the brigade. So, you kind of get to the point, maybe I better work on that.
Staff members, influence, any teachers that you recall?
One of my favorites was Steve Hagan, who taught chemistry. And I had several in the military department. John Padilla, I think it was John. He helped me a lot, and Major McGondal saved me a couple times from other issues. But I'm sitting there drawing a blank now, but yeah, there's quite a few teachers. Of course, living out on 17th Street, that was kind of Wentworth Alley out there. We had Colonel Molyneux, I guess coming out of there, you had Colonel Stagner on the corner, and then Captain Oliva was across the street, and then locked down from him was Captain Peak, and then you had Major Willoughby up on the next corner. Then I get on past our house, and I had John Gover and the Hagans and both of the Hepler families and John Walls. And he used to, I think he just stood up there and waited for me to come out of the house, because as a day dodger back in the 60s, we abided by the same rules as the boarding students. Our only difference was we did not have supervised study periods, and we did not have to do lunch inspections and go to meals. Other than that, we were expected to be in uniform anytime we were in public within the city limits of Lexington, and we're not allowed to drive cars unless we were more than a mile from school and drove straight to school and straight home. But somehow, anytime I would back my car out of the garage, he'd be coming down the street. So I'd get a little message the next day to either go see Colonel Perry or Colonel Molyneux, and, where are you driving? Well, you don't have to bring in another note. I was on an errand for my mother. Okay.
I forgot to say.
Yeah. But, everybody, a lot of the boarding students were always envious of the day dodgers, primarily because that was the two main reasons. We go out at night. You know, we didn't have to have study periods, and, you know, we didn't have to do all the marching in for the meals. But other than that, we went to all the same assemblies. We had to go to all the football games, the basketball games, anything that anybody else went to, we were involved in. And of course, at that time, the popular hangout was up the street here at the Ford and Rush drugstore. They had a soda fountain in there, and that's where everybody went after school. Well, we may have been in Wentworth, but, you know, there were several of us. You know, we were still in that class, and that's where our friends were. So we'd head up there too. Of course, the first stop was go home, change clothes. You know, inevitably, somebody'd walk in out of uniform.
I remember speaking to Rush Drugstore, the soda fountain.
Mm-hmm.
We were at a basketball game, and a guy named Kenny Best, I think.
With the Kenny Best and Delbert Best. We had two. It had been Kenneth Best, yeah.
He was in the field house. Of course, Colonel Perry sees him. He's out of uniform.
Mm.
And he looks at me and he says, "What are you going to do about that?" I said, "Well, I'll stick him, sir."
Mm.
Well, I did. And he's a good friend.
Uh-huh.
But I saw him down at Rush Drugstore and he was pissed at me.